in front of Rustum, in front of all of his cronies, to show that Islam is a religion of empowerment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings liberation to the heart, the soul, the mind, and the body in a different way altogether. And subhanAllah, Rustum wanted to humiliate him. So Rustum made him carry this huge pot of dirt. And he brought it back to Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And look at how Sa'id radiallahu anhu said. Sa'id said, هَذَا سَلَامُةُ الْأَرْضِ. This is him conceding his land to us. This means we're going to win. They saw it as empowerment. Everything was a sense of empowerment. Now, subhanAllah, that was already half of my talk, and that was just the first sentence on my page. The point is, dear brothers and sisters, the more you submit yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more empowered you become, the more you elevate. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said the closest you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is when? Is when? In what position? In your sujood, in your prostration. Think about how humiliating of a position sujood is. Think about how humiliating it is. You're putting your face on the ground, kneeling in every way possible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a humiliating position, right? But to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's powerful. And Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, the more you lower your body physically, the more Allah allows your soul to ascend. The soul becomes closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more you lower yourself physically, the closer you will be with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which is why he told Rabi' ibn Ka'b al-Aslami radiallahu ta'ala anhu to support me in bringing you closer to me. بِكَثْرَةِ السُّجُودِ. By prostrating more. The more you put yourself down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows you to elevate. The more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows you to rise. You know, some of you might have had the opportunity, obviously we're in Malaysia, but might have had the opportunity to read about Malcolm X rahimahullah ta'ala. There's a very powerful autobiography of Malcolm X rahimahullah compiled by Alex Haley. And he talks about Malcolm X was someone that spent his entire life being told that he wasn't good enough. It's very powerful. When he was a child, and he was a bright child, he was, his teacher asked him what he wanted to be, and he said he wants to be a lawyer. She said, no, that's not befitting for a black person. She didn't use the word black, she used a much more derogatory word. Why don't you be a carpenter or something? Why don't you do something that will involve your hands? You people aren't good with your minds. SubhanAllah, can you imagine a child hearing that? I want to be a doctor. No, look. It's okay, Malcolm. Stick to what's in your capability. Stick to what's in your capacity. Experiencing racism his entire life. Experiencing white supremacy his entire life. Experiencing then prison. And prison is a very humiliating experience. It breaks you down. And that's why most people come out of prison worse than when they went in. It breaks you down mentally, emotionally, physically, everything. They come out worse most of the time. Because it takes a strong will to be able to go through that and to still feel like you can achieve in life. And so when Malcolm started to do salah properly, he said that he couldn't make himself do sujood. He couldn't make himself prostrate because he felt like that would be belittling. He felt like it would put him down. And subhanAllah, can you imagine the man, and this is his honesty, when he would do salah, he would do ruku', and instead of doing sujood, he would fall on his knees. He wouldn't do sajda until he forced himself into a position of prostration. And he said, once I went into prostration, I never wanted to get up. I realized that submitting myself to Allah is different than submitting myself to any one of His creations. It's empowerment. It's liberation. It's growth. The soul ascends to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the more you lower yourself to Him, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise you. And subhanAllah, obviously the theme of dua has been running throughout this conference. Dua, 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 dua. And just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ud'u Allah wa antum muqinuna bil ijabah. Just call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with confidence, and Allah is going to answer you. Just call upon Allah. Believe in your dua. But before you believe in your dua, are you asking Allah as an agent, or are you asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as your Lord? Are you talking to Allah in your dua like a businessman that's appointing an agent? Or are you talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like the Prophet ﷺ says, Mas'alatul Masakeen? like a poor person in need, like someone who's begging? Have you put yourself into a position of ubudiyya, in a position of true servitude and slavery before you made the request of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? There's a reason why in Surah Al-Fatiha, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدْ comes before إِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. The testimony that you alone, O Allah, we submit ourselves. We put ourselves into voluntary servitude, slavery to you, worship to you, O Allah. We completely submit ourselves to you. وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. And from you we seek help. What's the point of going to إِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ if you're not going to submit yourself in ibadah first? Allah is not your insurance company. Allah is your Lord. Allah is your Rabb. Allah is your sustainer. When you call upon Him in that fashion, in that capacity. And when you look at the secret of the prophets that came before you, when they called upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, one of the biggest problems that we have is when we read the Quran, we read it as if it's the stories of the past, not to benefit ourselves. When I read about Zakaria alayhi salam, and I read about a man standing up and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a child at that age, you know, before he asked Allah for that child, what did he do for 90 years of his life? Put himself in servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even in the nature of his dua, in servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the beginning of Surah Maryam? ذِكْرُ رَحْمَةِ رَبِّكَ عَبْدَهُ زَكَرِيَّا. Listen very carefully to the eloquence of the Quran. This is a